Welcome to the Burn Bootcamp podcast. I'm your host, Morgan Klein, co-founder and CEO, along with my husband and company visionary, Devin Klein.
And together, with our amazing team, we are going to help you push past your limits, not just physically in our gyms, but right here, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually on the Burn Bootcamp podcast.
Together, we will take on challenges and break through barriers to transform into the best possible version of ourselves. We are more than a gym. We are a community. Your community. Let's go, Burn Nation.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Burn Bootcamp podcast. Listen, I've been waiting a very, very long time to have this episode today. I am so personally excited. We have the MDA team here, comprised of three individuals. Dr. Sharon Hesterly, who's the Chief Research Officer for the MDA. Welcome, Dr. Hesterly. Dr. Benjamin Brooks, who is the former medical director. And you got all types of letters after your name, sir. So we'll dive into that. And I have Lily Sander here, who is the MDA ambassador and advocate. And we are here to have a really in-depth conversation about neuromuscular disease, about muscular dystrophy from a scientific perspective, as most of us who are supporting the cause don't really understand the cause unless we have experienced it in our lives with a family member or a close friend or been involved heavily in the MDA. So we're going to explore what is neuromuscular disease, how does it affect families like the Sanders, how does it affect Lily, and what Lily is excited about, what you guys are excited about in terms of, you know, where the millions and millions of dollars that Burn Bootcamp has raised over the last several years toward the MDA's mission of curing neuromuscular disease. Where does that money go, and how does that get work? And what's the newest, the latest, the greatest, the cutting edge? And so what we're going to do here, everybody, is have a little roundtable discussion. And I thank you all so much for coming in. And I wanted to allow you to give yourself an introduction, as nobody knows you better than you. Tell Burn Nation, Dr. Brooks, we'll start with you. Go ahead and tell Burn Nation just a little bit of your background, summarized in a couple minutes, and how involved you've been in the MDA and why that's important to you.
I was exposed to polio through my cousin in 1950, and that really shaped what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So I went to college and did research on viruses like polio. It was a different virus at that time. And then when I went to Harvard Medical School, I was in the laboratory that identified that poliovirus grew in cells outside the brain, and that led Salk to develop the vaccine. And then later on, I went to the National Institutes of Health and did ALS translational research for 2 years, and then to Johns Hopkins to develop a retrovirus model of motor neuron disease that has been used to test medicines like the HERV genome and also tamoxifen in terms of a subset of ALS. Then I went on to continue my work with the retrovirus model at the University of Wisconsin, where Howard Temin, who had developed the retrovirus concept, had gotten the Nobel Prize. And so we worked for many years there, shaping the use of the model as a drug treatment system. And then at the same time, looking at clinical drug treatments for ALS. The Muscular Dystrophy Association has been very helpful with respect to working with networking throughout my whole time at the University of Wisconsin. And that led ultimately to groups like the NEALS group that is now ongoing throughout the United States. It started out as the Northeast ALS Association consortium. Now everyone calls it the Nearly Every ALS Consortium. And so the work we've been doing has led to development of drugs. We led to the drug development of Nudexta, and that has now become a drug that has led to other drugs that are being looked at for ALS. And then we looked at drugs like Medici Nova's drug, and that is now going into European trials. So I've really been involved with trying to translate preclinical data into clinical treatments for patients.
That is amazing, and we could unpack that in our own podcast for like another 3 hours. That is incredible. You've been at the ground level at a lot of this research for a very long time.
Right.
Yeah. Dr. Hesterly.
Hi, so I'm Sharon Hesterly. I'm the Chief Research Officer at the Muscular Dystrophy Association. And my training is in neuroscience, and I've been in this space for about 25 years, so my whole career in neuromuscular disease and rare disease. And I will say, I think my interest in the space was piqued when I was in grad school. I had a roommate in grad school who I noticed would wait until everyone left the room to stand up. And it was because he had Becker muscular dystrophy, and he was really self-conscious about how he had to brace himself on a table to be able to push up. And, you know, he later became a roommate of mine. And so I was very familiar with the disease and what it was like to live with the disease. And so when I got the opportunity to be part of the MDA and really oversee a lot of the research projects that we have here, that was, you know, a really fulfilling thing to be able to do. So I oversee our grants program. So we make research grants all over the world, actually, the United States and outside of the United States, wherever the best research is occurring. We also have a very large meeting every year that we oversee, and we have a clinical database with over 5,000 people with different types of neuromuscular disease that we can follow, and we can collect that data to be able to learn more about the disease. So that's just a little bit of what I do. I've also spent some time in industry, worked for Pfizer for a while, and various companies working in gene therapy, and kind of brought that knowledge back to MDA.
Okay.
So looking forward to our discussion.
Yes, very impressive. Okay, Lily, your turn.
I am a patient. Hold on. God. No, I'm kidding. I am a patient. I have muscular dystrophy, and I've really stepped into the role of patient advocacy and just using my story to really push forward the mission of the Muscular Dystrophy Association, and just personally advancing my goal of making sure that disabled people are welcomed in every space while we are searching for treatments.
Well, thank you all for that brief introduction. And for those that just don't know, and generally speaking, what the MDA is, you might have just heard about it. Just let me say a couple words before we really jump into the discussion. So the MDA is the #1 voluntary health organization in the United States for people living with muscular dystrophy, ALS, any related neuromuscular diseases, which we're going to learn more about today. But it's been 70 years plus that the MDA has led the way in accelerating research, advancing care, advocating for support for patients and their families. And Burn Boot Camp has been a proud supporter of the MDA. I was down in Naples, Florida at a gas station at a 7-Eleven, and I saw a flyer, and I looked down on the flyer, and it said MDA event at this park. Well, I knew the area. I looked behind me. I knew the park was right behind me, and it just happened to be the date that the event was being held in the park was the date that was on the flyer. So all I did is turn around, and I get in my car, and I just drive over to the parking lot, and I sit on the fence, and I just watch it for like 10 minutes. And I'm like, I'll never forget seeing kids in wheelchairs, mostly kids at this event, seeing kids in wheelchairs who were so happy. Mm-hmm. They were so happy. And I was like, you know what? I want to be a bigger part of this, because not only are those kids the beacon of emotional intelligence and positivity, we take fitness for granted as a society. Like, the ability to move our body is more of a chore than it is a privilege. It's more of something we hate to do than something that we love to do. And so we started a fundraiser called Be Their Muscle, and it's one weekend out of the year. Burn Nation comes together. We run Saturday camps. We invite patients and their families in to some that are not able to mobilize their hands. We'll just I'll put the mic on them, and they will train a camp, or they'll just be an assistant trainer for the day and just be a part of that fitness environment in which they're normally not in. And our membership shows up, and we've raised like millions of dollars for it. And so that is the Be Their Muscle campaign. And, I just wanted to give everybody a quick background of how this all came to be, where the seed was originally planted. But I don't want to talk much more than that, because the wealth of knowledge that you three have, I'm here to unpack that. So Dr. Brooks, we'll start with you, and we'll go counterclockwise here. So all of our listeners out there that may not know what muscular dystrophy is, can we give a quick scientific perspective on what is muscular dystrophy? What does it mean to you? And what are the primary causes and risk factors that are associated with it?
In a simple statement, muscular dystrophy is an abnormal muscle and how it grows, but it could have many causes. And what has happened is that there are many neuromuscular diseases, Some are familial, and of those that are familial, some are genetic. But some of those familial diseases might also be through an immunological abnormality. Now, it's possible that immunological abnormality may be genetic as well, but it's not as clear-cut as the gene things. And Dr. Hessley will probably talk more to the direct genes that cause these diseases. There are neuromuscular diseases like myasthenia gravis that are caused by abnormal autoimmune conditions, similar to like you might have arthritis or lupus. And these can lead to now, fortunately, treatable conditions. And then there are degenerative diseases such as spinal muscular atrophy and amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. And the question with those diseases is, where do they start? Do they start inside the nervous system? Do they start within the muscle? Is it both? And the research that's been going on for the last hundreds of years has been very complex. And there are some features for all of these diseases with respect to some may be due to genetic defects that can be corrected, similar to SMA and what is going on with there. There may be some genetic diseases for ALS that are corrected, similar to what's been going on with the work with tofersen and those kind of diseases. But there's still many unanswered questions out there that have to move forward.
Yeah, I would just add to that I think the way to think about neuromuscular disease is they all cause weakness. They all cause some type of muscle weakness at the end of the day. And that can be caused because of a problem in the muscle, but it can also be a problem in the nervous system that leads to muscle weakness. So we sort of have two big categories of diseases that we look at. These are all rare diseases, meaning they affect less than 200,000 people in the U.S., each one individually. Collectively, there could be as many as 1 million people living with these diseases, but individually, they're rare diseases. The vast majority, as Dr. Brooks mentioned, are genetic. They're caused by a gene defect in either the muscle or the nerve that affects, your ability to move the muscle and causes weakness. They have various different effects depending on the disease, in addition to weakness, but they are typically progressive, which is not all of them, but the majority are progressive. And so that's sort of a unique aspect to the disease that you...
Meaning it like compounds over time?
Exactly, so that they will continue to get worse over time. And that's particularly, I think, difficult for everyone.
Yeah. And Lily, why don't you tell us where you fall on that spectrum, what condition that you have, and just, what you've learned about all of that. Because, that is, these two have dedicated their entire lives to helping people like you. So what form of muscular dystrophy do you have? And let's talk about everything you learned.
I have Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease, also more commonly known as CMT. So basically, the myelin sheath in my system is breaking down over time, caused by the breakdown of the gene the chemical PMP22, which is more sciencey than I'll get into. But basically, my brain does not connect to my muscles, and that is what causes the muscle weakness. If you don't use your muscles, you lose them, and that's what I'm experiencing. And like you mentioned, it is progressive, so it gets worse over time, but the prognosis is not easily predicted. So it's kind of like, where are we? And so there's 100 types of Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease, probably over, and they all affect differently. Some of it is demyelination, like I talked about. Some of it affects the axons of the nerves, but I have muscle weakness, and it's in the peripheral nervous system, so it's below the elbows and below the knees, which are really affected. So I can build muscle everywhere else, but below the knee and below the muscle, I can't build any muscle, and so that is really difficult, and that's where my weakness lies.
So for how muscular dystrophy will typically progress, when do you know? What are the common symptoms at different stages? Dr. Brooks, how do you begin to identify muscular dystrophy, and is it important to catch it early, to apply treatments, and what type of we'll go into this much in depth later, but maybe you can just introduce some of the newer things that have been working more recently.
For a long time in history, the clinical examination, looking for weakness and patterns of weakness, has been very important. More recently, with the onset of the molecular biology of these genetic diseases, we use the testing for genes to see what we can find, and then we can look for wide variety of genes that may have effects, and some genes may affect other genes, and that's why it's so important to continue that kind of research. Moving forward, though, the issue is with respect to treatment, and what the Muscular Dystrophy Association has done over the years is support physical therapy. There have been studies looking at the effect of exercise on multiple diseases and what kind of exercise could help and how to use that. And in fact, exercise can help in many ways at the level of the limbs and at the level of the diaphragm in terms of breathing. And those are very important in terms of slowing the progression of the disease.
And we've seen that. We've seen exercise be productive towards slowing the disease.
In clinical trials, it's been shown to be slow across a number of diseases. Not all the diseases yet. They still have to be carefully studied in research, but more are being studied. And the right degree of exercise has been effective.
How far have we gone in terms of understanding the totality of neuromuscular disease? Are we unpacking it? Like, are we 80% there? Do we really get it? Do we really understand it? Where are we at? How deep have we been able to dive into, let's say, CMT? Is that what it's called? CMT, for example.
It's very important. There's a statement out there: the study of things caused must precede the study of causes of things, and that's where the Muscular Dystrophy Association has been very helpful in pushing policy at the government level with respect to, like, MD's SMART through the CDC, trying to figure out where do these diseases occur, what kinds are there. If you look specifically at the different kinds of disease, like CMT versus dystrophy versus myasthenia gravis, registries can be established. One of the most important effects of the Muscular Dystrophy Association over the years has been taking care of patients. And then patients will come to the association, and then they'll have them on a list of, we're seeing these people. And that information goes back to the government in particular, saying, we have more patients than you think you have by the way you're measuring that. And recently, across some diseases like ALS, the government has corrected the way it's looked at counting these diseases. And so counting the diseases is important, and then you figure out where there are combinations of diseases.
And Dr. Hesterly, you're on the cutting edge side of this, right? You're on the research side. You're forging new ground. We have that in common. As a visionary of an organization, we kind of run through the walls before anybody else. So how, from your perspective, from the research perspective, are the typical nature of progression in muscular dystrophy seems to be slowing, generally speaking, due to treatment and due to donations, and taking those donations and turning them into actual, real, practical, peer-revised, third-party studies, clinical trials that you can then turn around and run beta groups and patient groups on. So talk to me about the cutting edge.
Yeah, so we're actually kind of in a renaissance period right now in neuromuscular disease, where we had to create this field that people didn't know a lot about in the 50s and 60s. So we funded a lot of research, and a lot of it was very basic, was asking really basic questions. So how do muscles function? How do nerves connect with muscles? And all of that research created this huge, I guess, a critical mass of information that has been used in recent years to develop drugs and meaningful therapies. So as of this date, we have almost 30 drugs now approved for neuromuscular diseases. And, I'd say 28 of those were in the last 10 years. So, I mean, just miraculous. We hit this tipping point where we knew enough that we're really able to apply this knowledge. And technologies have improved. Our knowledge has, but we also have new tools, like gene therapy, where we can put back genes that are, not functional. We can put a functional copy. And so we have gene therapies that are approved that can be miraculous in some cases. So I'd say we're in a really exciting time. For once, we have tools where we can actually impact these diseases. It's very hopeful.
Yeah, that is hopeful. And Lily, I'm sure that, you feel that. So talk to me about your perspective of seeing Dr. Hesterly, seeing Dr. Brooks and the rest of their, greater teams and everybody that is on the clinical side of this. making that type of progress must give you hope. Like, you're ready for it, I'm sure.
Yeah, I've had a unique perspective with talking to researchers and scientists over the years quite intentionally and having these conversations so they see the patient side of things, and so they really understand what they are researching for, and so it really gives a face to the cells and the mice models that they're working with. And the first couple of times that I talked to researchers and scientists that were making groundbreaking discoveries, I really felt hope. Being a patient is really, really difficult. Specialist after specialist, doctor after doctor saying, there's nothing I can do for you. Go home, exercise, live your life to the fullest you can, and overcome challenges, go to physical therapy. But there's no treatment, there's no cure. But seeing these people in the lab doing the things that we need to do to find the science for this, it is incredibly fulfilling, and it gives me so much hope for the future and for future generations that they won't have to deal with neuromuscular disease. So I can't even describe how transformative it has been in my life to see this kind of research happening.
Speaking of the acceleration of this whole thing, let's take a little tangent. And, the AI is the big buzz right now. And especially when it comes to biology, AI can be, this seems to be right up, maybe Dr. Hestley, right up your alley over here. But Dr. Brooks, what excites you about, going from experiencing polio in your family to then now seeing that, hey, there might be a tool that we've developed as human beings that you could potentially accelerate all of the hard work you've put in over the last decades. You could learn those models, these AI models. You could teach them all the things and now it can process information faster. Do you think that's going to move us closer, quicker to where we need to go?
Yes, it will, but at different levels. So the AI that allows me to beat someone at chest is not the AI that drives my truck across the country. So one has to be careful of looking at what AI is. And in medicine, often AI is putting in information that has been gleaned from observational studies, controlled studies, putting that into the electronic medical record and using that to key and inform a doctor, well, if this combination has occurred, you should think of this disease. So that's very helpful in terms of what AI can do at the level of the individual patient, and that can happen now. And that will be a continual process, always changing as more information is put into the system. Now, the use of AI to do research may be more complicated because often what is in AI is what is known rather than what is unknown. And when you look at science, what has been most exciting about the science is the experiment that went the opposite way of what you thought it would do. And that's the true advance in science. And that's something that AI doesn't give you right away. It may ultimately provide information for AI later generations, but there still is room for creativity in science and observation and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say I think what excites me most about the potential for AI, because I don't think we're quite there yet, but we have this vast scientific literature. So, all of the science that gets done generally gets published. Eventually, it's reviewed and it's published. And we have this huge literature. And what AI is particularly good at doing is pulling out patterns, as Dr. Brooks alluded to, for diagnostic purposes, but also there might be patterns that a really sophisticated AI could pull out of all of that literature that might be something that, humans haven't been able to put together. I will say it is a matter of, what and what's in the database, and you have to, hope that that's accurate because that's what you have to work with. The AI can't judge the accuracy of it. But I think it's going to be an interesting tool, and it should, as we get more fluent with how to use it, I think we're going to start seeing some really interesting leaps forward.
Yeah, hopefully we can accelerate with this at the same compounded growth over the last 10 years, as you mentioned. Mm-hmm. 10 of the most recent drugs, or most of the recent drugs, have come out in the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. Lily, when you think about the advancements and what the tools that they're able to use now to help accelerate the human mind, does this give you hope? Does this give you frustration that it didn't happen sooner? Like where are you mentally as somebody that is experiencing all of the research accelerate in real time as your disease is steadily progressing as well?
I think patients always feel frustration. For the last 5 years, we're told, oh, it's going to come out in the next 5-10 years. And then we're at that point and we're like, okay, where is it? Obviously, we're not in the lab. Most patients aren't super aware of the research that is happening. Largely, science is hard to read for the average person. And so I think there's a large gap of accessibility. And so that's where the frustration can come in. So I wish more patients were aware of these things and these advancements in an accessible way so that they can feel that hope. But I do think there will always be a level of frustration that, okay, we are sitting at home, we are progressing, we are suffering, and there's not enough time to, and there's not enough money, frankly, to get drugs fast enough. And so I do think there will always be frustration, but on the flip side, with all of the technological advancements that we're seeing, that is encouraging that we can speed this up and we can use technology to our advantage.
Dr. Brooks, what's the most exciting drug treatment breakthrough that you are working on right now, or one that has recently been approved?
Well, I would lead Dr. Hessley to talk about this, but I think the most exciting thing that happened in the last week was the advancement of gene therapy to older patients with Duchenne dystrophy. And maybe you want to advance on that.
Yeah, I can comment a little more on that. So
Please.
we've been working for many years to develop, since the discovery of the gene that causes Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So I'll mention that's a form of muscular dystrophy that is particularly severe. It affects boys because it's carried on the Y chromosome. It's carried on the X chromosome, and boys only have one X. So if that one is defective, they get the disease. And so, it's a rapidly progressive disease. It's usually fatal in the late 20s, although better care, the guys have been living longer. But we now have a gene therapy, so we're able to put back an almost fully functional copy of the gene that's defective in Duchenne. And just recently, the FDA has approved expanding the age ranges from just, 4 to 5-year-olds into all age ranges, ambulatory and non-ambulatory, for gene therapy. So that really opens things up because a lot of these guys who had stopped walking weren't qualifying for clinical trials anymore. So now this will give them an avenue that they can try. Certainly safety is a big issue, and it's something we're going to keep a close eye on, but it was a real step forward. And I'll also mention, since you asked about big, leaps forward too, I would also like to mention that there was a gene therapy approved for a disease called spinal muscular atrophy. So this is a disease that affects the way the muscles communicate with the nerves. And the most severe form that affects babies essentially leaves these babies very rapidly, experience paralysis, more or less. And by the time they're 2, they usually die, even with supportive care. But the gene therapy that was introduced, there are actually 3 drugs on the market now, a gene therapy and 2 others, one of which was produced specifically with research that was directly funded by MDA, are life-saving for these babies. They allow them to not just live, but to walk and to really function. So, that's a case where the gene therapy and the other therapies for this disease have been dramatic. And we want to get to the same place with some of the other dystrophies as well.
And when you say the other dystrophies, you mean the categories. And so Duchenne's being one of the more aggressive ones in boys. My muscle buddy for the MDA, Bryson Foster, I'm sure you guys had ran into him at some point in the past. He's amazing. I got to know him really well, and he would always keep me updated on the latest and greatest, new thing that was coming out. He was always so excited about it. So he had some hope because there's some really specific research being done for Duchenne's. Is this also happening in the CMT category? Is it categorical as we break through? Is each neuromuscular, maybe you can comment and then I'll come back to you on, is each what's the difference between the neuromuscular diseases from a carbon chemical standpoint, a real sciencey standpoint? Dr. Brooks, if you can get into that. But first, Lily, Is there research being done in the same way for Duchenne's for CMT that you're aware of, or what's the latest? What's the most exciting thing for you lately?
So that's actually a very well-timed question. A few weeks ago, I was at a conference where we had the greatest minds in CMT research in a room, and we said, let's get you together and let's have you think about this together. I will say that CMT is usually not fatal, so it's not at the top of the list. Usually patients can live their full lifespan with it, with the exception of a few types that attack the respiratory muscles. But like you mentioned, there's gene therapy, there's CRISPR coming out, there's small molecule targets that are being advanced. So there is research. I will say, personally, I believe there's never enough research for CMT. It's incredibly rare, and I have one of the rarest subtypes, and so that presents an additional challenge. So there are studies, and there is research happening, but I will say that I don't think it's at the same rate because, these companies have to think, these organizations have to think logically with business and with the diseases that are at the forefront. But I'm hopeful that in the next few years, advancements are being made, and I have that hope after talking to these scientists and researchers and the greatest in the field.
And that's the video your dad sent me where you have a blue suit on, burned blue, by the way. It was a very nice choice. And you were basically mic dropping in front of like the smartest people in the world.
Well,
that was pretty cool. I was proud of you, if you want to know.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I really wanted to give them the patient perspective. I had a whole list of things that I dreamt of in my life, and I was really trying to pull on the emotional strings of I wish I could do this, that, and the other, because I think a lot of times researchers need that patient face to really drive the research and to get through the hard days. And so that was my goal.
I see you. It worked. I got emotional. I'm not even a researcher. Speaking of CRISPR, that is something that people have heard about. I believe it's a DNA gene slicing technology. Dr. Brooks, do you want to take a shot at what is this thing? Why is it a breakthrough? How is it helping neuromuscular disease?
Well, I think this is Dr. Hestley's area of expertise, but
take your angle at it.
I find it very exciting. Very strong-willed women sort of pushed through the concept and went against a lot of difficulty in getting the idea pushed through. And the book that was written about this, I thought was very excellent in terms of the difficulties with doing science for anyone, and if you're a woman in science, in that sense. Maybe you can talk to that issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think CRISPR, it's a way to do gene editing. So that was the big breakthrough. And the difference, I will say, if we talk about gene therapy, there we're just trying to deliver a healthy copy of the gene to the cells. Gene editing, we're actually changing the genes in the chromosome and correcting mutations directly in the chromosome of your DNA. So that's the real breakthrough when we talk about CRISPR. And we're starting to see clinical trials of using this technique in humans. And it has the advantage that after you fix that chromosome, even if those cells divide and go on, they're fixed for perpetuity. So it's a really powerful tool, and I think it has a lot of potential for both, genetic diseases like all of, many of the neuromuscular diseases. And it's also been an incredible research tool that has allowed us to very quickly make models that we can use to model disease and to be able to test therapies. So,
very often the success comes when you can go to a tissue where you can have access to the cells. And the difficulty moving forward at the level of muscle and nerves is how to easily do that editing and how to do it safely.
And so then you are the one doing the editing because you had been deep in research with ALS, and I mean, how many, almost all the types of neuromuscular disease as you've gone throughout your career. So you're really hands-on formerly.
Right, and animal models are being looked at with respect to CRISPR at the ALS level, at the CMT level, and the next step is moving it forward to doing it in patients. And there are really advances in terms of how to get, let's say, ASOs into tissues from the oral delivery rather than intrathecal, which is putting a spine needle into the back of the spine. And the same is going to be true in terms of CRISPR, how to get the actual chemicals in that do the editing and get them in the right place at the right concentration. And this is the journeyman's work that occurs at the science level.
So the practical application that the CRISPR technology is providing, it's providing an increased level of hope and insight into what could be possibly done. I guess what's stopping us from going faster? You know, logically, when I sit back and think about it from the outside looking in, it's like, okay, well, Lily and others with neuromuscular dystrophy, especially boys with Duchenne's, whose lifespan is much shorter than most. It's like time's ticking. So, like, well, you know, what's the balance that we have between clinical trials and trying things versus with like willing patients versus being cautious and being safe?
Yeah. So if I can answer, everything has a risk-benefit analysis. And all of these things come with some risk. In the case of CRISPR and gene editing, it's a really powerful technology, but at the same time, a lot of it depends on a little enzyme that comes from a bacteria. And there's some concern that, you know, the body might address that as if it's a foreign invader and attack it. So you might have an immune response to that. It also, to be able to fix your DNA, it has to cut it and then make changes. And what we worry about is that, you know, that little enzyme will sit in there and just cut. Will it cut the right place every time, or will it eventually cut the wrong place? So those are some of the safety concerns that we worry about. And they're being very rapidly addressed. This technology is evolving very, very quickly. So I think those are the sort of things we're weighing. It's, you know, we want to do this, we want to move forward, but we want to do it safely. And we are in that sort of we don't know what we don't know situation. Mm-hmm. So it's how fast can we push things to evolve these technologies and do it in a way that's not harmful to people.
Lily, when it comes to CRISPR and it comes to the time, the sense of urgency around it from a patient's perspective, what is your sense of urgency? Is you like, get out of the way, put that thing, give me that thing, let's go? Or is it more like, are you patient because you also would like to participate in caution?
I do want to participate in caution if I have a gene editing tool that potentially could give me a worse defect. I don't know that I would be the guinea pig. It is exciting, but I don't want to have that up to chance. I think that, again, you don't know what you don't know, and so I appreciate the safety and the waiting. I certainly wouldn't want to be the first ever CMT patient to try it out. So yes, but there is also this sense of urgency. So I'm conflicted about it. I talk about this all the time. I don't know.
You don't want to be the first woman on Mars, huh?
No, I do not.
Okay, well, that's good. Well, it's Dr. Brooks.
Well, I'd like to say that I think it's very important based on what we're talking about here is resources, okay? So if there was enough money to do everything, we would do it. My son's a neurosurgeon. He was at a conference recently, and one country that was doing a particular type of operation couldn't do it the way we do it because they couldn't afford the kind of equipment and step that was needed. So resources are very important, and that's where, you know, fundraising coming in from Muscular Dystrophy Association and from government sources, also industrial sources. I think the research, the advances that have occurred in neuromuscular disease have been based on the establishment of a knowledge base by research that Muscular Dystrophy Association was very significant in establishing. And then that led the industry to look at that and then to look at potential solutions to the treatments. So that's why it's so important to have a Muscular Dystrophy Association, patient organization that is pushing for the patients, and fundraising that allows for new ideas that are out of the box now, but then industry might put them into the box.
And for everyone that is out there who has donated $1 to the Be Their Muscle campaign or just greater MDA in general, when we talk about something like, let's say, as the director of clinical trials or the chief research officer or an MDA advocate and ambassador from that perspective, when that, how much, obviously the answer could be too much is never enough, but in terms of like a percentage guesstimated from where we are at today in terms of funding ability, right? When Burn Boot Camp pulls together, I think it's been upwards of $3 million or so, which we're super proud of. Where is that going to, where's it going for families? And then we'll get into each of your individual experiences with neuromuscular dystrophy and living in it or amongst it familially. But let's start there, because I not many people ask me that. And I think they generally just trust in Burn Boot Camp. They generally just trust in the MDA, two companies with a great reputation. And then when you partner together, the reputation's amplified. And so it's not a big concern, but we've always raised money for summer camps in research. That's always been our perspective. So because we wanted to give kids an ability to go to a camp that has amenities for wheelchairs and for weak muscles, and which is a more mobile for those types of environments. So we've always really prided ourselves and our raise on, like, you know what? We're putting a lot of this into camp, but I also know a lot of it goes into the research. So where does, $3 million plus the other millions of dollars of research that you have, where does it go that helps you the most, that you're most excited about? And then, like, how far are we away from getting everything funded simultaneously?
That's difficult.
I know.
To
I know.
say.
It's a loaded question, Doc.
My uncle was on General Patton's staff during World War II, and he said, always keep 10% of the tanks in reserve, and because the general will want those tanks at some particular time. So logistics is very difficult. But I think, the direct meeting of the needs of the patient at a time like the camp situation, that is a in-person, upfront benefit to the patient while they have the disease, while the research is trying to come up with an answer. So I think a certain definite proportion of patient-directed activity is very important. You can't put it all into research, but you can certainly use the power of the concept of the Muscular Dystrophy Association to go out to industry, to government, and make policy decisions. And that's where the power of the Muscular Dystrophy Association comes as a patient-oriented organization, is to make statements based on the individual research that has been accomplished and is trying to be accomplished in time.
Yeah, I agree. The advocacy efforts are very powerful to leverage larger sources of money from the U.S. government, for example, to really encourage them to apply that money to this problem. I can also say that, the money that has been raised by Burn Boot Camp is enough to fund 10 different research projects, full research projects, multi-year projects that have had huge benefit. So, for example, a kind of project that is funded with funds from Burn Boot Camp is we're trying to understand now how to be able to do gene therapy multiple times. Right now, after you treat someone, you basically immunize them against the therapy. So you can't retreat them. So we've just funded a big research project at University of Florida to use some of the new drugs that have been approved for myasthenia gravis to see if we can use those to actually tamp down those antibodies and be able to retreat people. So that's an example of the kind of research that
exciting.
The funds from Burn Boot Camp are enabling us to do. We also had 20 camp sessions this summer. Camp has come roaring back. We had some challenges during the pandemic with an in-person camp, but they're coming back full steam ahead and really strong, and have added to our regular summer camps also now family weekends so that we can involve parents and siblings to get a sort of mini camp experience over a weekend. So we're expanding those as well.
Oh, that's super cool. Yeah. I like the family idea. That's one thing as I got to know Lily and as I got to know the Sanders and Bryson and the Fosters, that was one thing I know you guys were working on back when we really started partnering with you, was hey, this is a familial challenge that we're gonna conquer, but it's together. It's not isolated. It's not just the patient. It's the patient and their families. So I love that. That's amazing. Lily, what do those things mean to you?
So I grew up going to MDA summer camp, and I remember those years so fondly. I keep in touch with so many people from that time in my life very closely. Those relationships early on in my life, 8 years old, really helped build my advocacy. That's the first time that I was interviewed and I had a camera in front of my face. And it also built relationships that have obviously lasted, that really empower me to live well with this disease. So I'm a big advocate for funding summer camps. I think that helping the quality of life for patients while we are working on the research is incredibly valuable. Obviously, research is one of the most important things. But I also think having the care centers, having places where patients can go for wheelchairs and mobility aids at a reduced cost, having these centers where you can go see all of your specialists in one day, those are priceless. And also giving kids voices and relationships and community is so important. And I really appreciate the addition of the family camps. I think it's incredibly difficult as a family to face neuromuscular disease, and especially for siblings. I think that it's so important to have those communities and to have that support and to let kids be kids and not be medical complexities and patients all of the time. It is incredibly valuable from a mental health standpoint while we are waiting for the research to catch up.
So speaking of family weekend, each of you have had your own exposure in your personal life to a neuromuscular disease of some sort. Is polio a neuromuscular disease?
Yes,
It
it's
is.
a viral
Okay.
caused neuromuscular disease.
Okay, and that's really what kicked your
Right.
inspiration off. So why don't we just talk about, just from an emotional perspective, right? We can maybe set the science down for a moment and just talk from an emotional perspective about, the challenges that people wouldn't see unless they otherwise lived with somebody or had experienced neuromuscular disease themselves.
Right. In a few words, what happened was he was a lieutenant in the Navy. He got his polio just after coming out of the Navy because of the Salk vaccine having a complication with the polio vaccine. And he very quickly required an eye and lung, which is the way we approach polio in those days. And that was very difficult for the family, and we as a family associated with them would come up on the summer and spend some time in the summer spelling them in that regard. There was a famous high school student of my uncle's kid who came and did I and the Young jokes. He was Jay Leno.
Oh, no way.
And he still remembers the I and Lung jokes that he did as a high school student. So it's very impressive what can happen to a person and to a family and how a disease affects a family. And there needs to be a lot of resources. At that point in time, there was the National Foundation March of Dimes that was very helpful with that kind of thing. But obviously, the history of medicine changed because the vaccine took away polio. And that whole concept of how a patient-based advocacy system for polio now could look at something like Muscular Dystrophy Association.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think maybe we'll come back to me. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Come back. Sorry, I just lost my thought.
No, that's good. So Lily, when you think about the challenges that that your families face, that maybe not people that aren't in your household every day don't realize, like, what are some of the everyday things that you struggle with, that you've obviously normalized, but so you'll have to dramatize them a little bit for other people. But what are those things, and how has it been difficult for your family?
Yeah, like you said, at some point it does become normalized. You have to move on with your life.
Right.
You can't be stuck in the state of, okay, I've been diagnosed, I need to do what I need to do. And so that's really how I've looked at it. I always say that my pain has fueled my passion. And so things like this are therapeutic for me. But living with a neuromuscular disease is incredibly, incredibly difficult. I don't think I would ever be able to describe in words the challenges and the anxiety and the depression that it causes within a whole family. My mom recently shared with me that as soon as I was diagnosed, and I had no idea about this, but she was incredibly sad for just grieving the life that she had pictured for her daughter. But I had no idea of this at the time. And really, I think growing up, I was 4 years old when I was diagnosed, so I didn't understand what was going on. And I've really had to cope with the realities as I've grown and as I've understood more. But I think that things like the MDA and things that provide community and specialists and support groups, that is the most important thing while we're coping with this disease. Just the emotional effects, it is incredibly difficult. As most people know, I don't know, maybe most people don't know this, but when you are disabled, mental health disorders are a common comorbidity. You are left with the fear of, okay, how am I going to get from point A to point B? Health anxiety and depression about your life, stuck in a cycle of grief, grieving the life that you've pictured, especially with progressive diseases. And I can't even imagine how, fatal diseases affect a family, because I don't personally experience that. But living with neuromuscular disease is one of the most difficult things. But again, you have to pick yourself up and you have to do what you need to do to be okay. For some people, that's stepping into advocacy work. And for others, that's carrying on their lives with a disability. But I also do want to stress that disabled lives are worth living. And there's an incredible amount of joy and resilience within these communities. But that doesn't downplay the major, major effects that it has.
And Dr. Hesterly, you in college, you had the experience where your roommate, was affected by neuromuscular disease. What did you learn through that experience?
Yeah, no, I was, his perseverance. So he was also in science and was working in a laboratory, and he wanted to be seen like everyone else. I mean, it was really important to him. Eventually, he was having trouble even opening the tops of test tubes. And it became challenging for him, and he sort of veered, I think, into a slightly different direction that didn't involve lab work. So his diagnosis had an impact on what he decided to do with his life. So you could see directly how it was affected. Even things like going out with friends. We were in grad school. We would go out in the evenings to bars, as one does, and he would have to lock his knees to be stable because he had a lot of muscle weakness. And that meant if he just got tapped, he would fall. And then we'd all get thrown out because they would assume, that he was intoxicated. So, I mean, this is living with a neuromuscular disease, things people don't have to think about every day. It is a lot of logistics. How do you get from point A to point B? A lot of concerns. So, saw that up close and have also, of course, gotten to know a lot of families over the years, and, even diseases like Duchenne that are really rapidly progressive. We have moms who are up every couple of hours at night to turn their sons because you get to a point where you can't turn yourself. It's a complete loss of independence, which is very frustrating for the person experiencing, especially a young man whose mother is his primary caretaker. So, yeah, huge impact on families.
So what is, obviously that emotional, those experiences all drive you, and you get to live it real time. And Lily, what I've admired the most about you is your self-awareness around mental health. And, like you said, okay, I can't use my hands exactly the way I want to. Well, I'm going to take that energy, I'm going to put it into my mind, right? Like that's what I perceive you to do. And the first time I heard you, you were like, what? How old are you now?
17.
Yeah,
tomorrow. 17 tomorrow.
Tomorrow? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. I think you're like 14. I don't know, maybe the first time.
Yeah.
I heard you speak, and I'm like, this is the most articulate 14-year-old girl I've ever heard. We got to come podcast one day, but we got to get the scientists to come do it with us, so that we can have that, practical versus research and lab perspective. But I just wanted to say that I've always admired that about you.
Thank you.
And podcasting might be your superpower in the long run. Maybe you should start your own show.
Well,
Oh,
I'm launching a show like next week.
You are?
Yeah. So I'll send you the link.
Plug it right now.
But-
No, you got to plug it right now. There's like thousands of people listening to this. You
When
gotta
will
plug
this
it.
come out?
Oh, it's out. Don't worry.
When will this come out?
This
though?
is out later.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm coming out with a podcast called Beyond the Diagnosis,
Okay.
where I have expert insights and patient stories. And so I have always been on the other side of the camera where I'm being interviewed, but now I get to interview other people. And my parents were told when I was diagnosed that a lot of kids with muscular diseases are really smart because they can't do sports and they really have to use their minds. And so, like you said, you have to think about your career and you have to pivot when you lose ability. And so that's definitely impacted me looking into where I'm going to go to college and what I'm going to do with my life. So yeah, it's definitely had to be, how am I going to use my brain and how can that be sustainable?
Dr. Brooks, when you look back on everything, all the blood and sweat and tears that you've put into advancing this cause, maybe a moment that or two, or just wherever your mind goes on what makes you proud? Like what is a moment or two that you could really say, you know what? These long, hard hours, I'm directing, whether I'm sure you had a couple decades where you were, or a decade where you were a journeyman, and then you advance and you advance and you advance, and now you're overseeing the clinical trials and research and all the things that go into, being a medical, being a scientist in general, a doctor in general. What are you most proud of?
Well, I think what I'm most proud of was the early days of looking for the SOD1 gene.
SOD1.
Okay,
What is SOD1?
Superoxide dismutase, the first gene that was identified as a form of amyotrophic lateral sclerosis.
This is like the ground level. This is when we realized what's going on here.
Well, we didn't realize it. We knew it was a familial condition, but the story I'm going to tell is that I went around and collected family bloods throughout multiple states. From New England all the way down through the South, and sent them back and put them into the group with Tipu Sadiq, which was a competitive group with the one at Robert Brown's group. And so the way things happen in science is interesting because you get an idea, then you need to get data, and then sometimes the data involves driving around, taking a blood sample, and getting it back into the right place. And so that on the grounds shoe leather type of science is what I'm most proud of because we had to get the data in. Many years later, we did the same thing with a issue with respect to viral causes of ALS, where we had to get new data from multiple sites, and that didn't involve as much driving. We could use the internet, but the issue is you'll hear increasingly exciting stories about what happened on those trips to get the blood samples back. That type of thing.
Yeah, really hitting the ground, going to get it done, getting your hands dirty. Dr. Hesterly, what makes you most proud? Obviously, you haven't always been the chief research officer. It takes time to get there. You've had a career in and out of getting your hands dirty, I'm sure, too. So what makes you most proud to be a part of the MDA organization?
Yeah, I think I'm most proud of the work we've done in gene therapy. And so I worked at MDA at the beginning of my career and left for a while and then came back. And so it's really gratifying to see that some of the things that were put in place when I was there the first time are really coming to fruition. So, over the last 20 years, gene therapy went through a phase where, there was a death early on that was very tragic, and it really set the field back for many, many years. And MDA's just sort of stuck in there and quietly kept funding this work and said, we're going to figure this out. It's going to work. And that's while I was there, and it was something I was able to advocate for and really, sow those seeds. So to come back and see that we've got drugs approved now for gene therapy. And I think the other thing I'm really proud of is that MDA has trained over 2,000 new scientists.
Okay.
And obviously I wasn't there for all of that. I didn't do all of that directly, but to be able to support, building this field and building capacity so that we will always have investigators trained and ready to go and enthusiastic about neuromuscular disease. I think it's been a real important contribution, something I feel very good about.
Well, that's incredible. And thank you too for your lifelong contribution. I know how important it is to organizations like ours who really look through the lens of the Sanders, right, and Lily, and try to do as much as we can to be a part of the community. You know, Bern says like we're community as our pillar. That's the glue that holds us all together. Well, that means you then have to take everyone in your community. You're not allowed to leave people out.
Yeah.
Right? You can't like this whole idea around community means like, oh, the people that I want to surround myself with. No. The community is all 50,000 people in Huntersville, North Carolina. And what are we doing to serve above and beyond? That's what I'm most proud about. But Lily, when you think about, you know, these two incredibly smart people and their dedication for their entire career, right, to helping you and families like yours, what does the MDA do for you, and how does that make you feel? How does that make you feel proud?
The MDA really gives me a platform to speak and to do really exciting projects. Last summer, I didn't film it, but I starred in a short film that raised money for the MDA. And I get to speak to parents. I did a parent panel a couple months ago where I talked to them about how to help their kids. Just things like that really make me proud, where I'm given this platform to use what I've gone through to help other people. Also with summer camp, if I can spread the word and talk about how great camp was and how empowering it was for me as a young child, if someone makes a donation to camp and makes it happen, and that happens for another child, that just fills me with so much joy if I can do something for another child. And also, all of the work that the MDA does legislatively is incredibly important to me. Soon, they're taking advocates to Capitol Hill, where they're going to talk to legislators, and that kind of stuff just makes me so proud that we are working on the quality of life. We are working firsthand with the government to make sure that disabled people are thought of and are supported. That just makes me so proud, and to be an ambassador of the MDA, it fills me with so much joy.
I'm sure we'll see you on Capitol Hill.
Yes, you will.
With another mic drop. Wow. Well, you know, it's been a special place in my heart since I really understood what it was in that 7-Eleven gas station in Naples, Florida. And we will continue to do everything we can to advance the cause, advance the mission, and eventually eliminate neuromuscular disease. And I'm so hopeful. All the technology you guys are talking about, all the decades of research that have gone into the prerequisite for the technology that we now have is incredibly exciting. And I know I look forward to it. And, you know, I get messages on my social media all the time about people that might want to be a volunteer or a donor, or how, like, if they're like me, which Burn Nation and I share a lot in common. We don't just like to donate our money. We also like to donate our time and our energy, and really make a difference with our physiological being, not just a piece of paper. Both are important, but how can volunteers, donors contribute to the MDA's mission from each of your perspective here before we wrap up?
Well, we've had patients and families donate time in the clinics and at the MDA centers, also at the camps. There are many ways that you can help the Muscular Dystrophy Association, even in their offices. Sometimes as like high school interns working in the office for nothing but getting things done, making sure things are accomplished. But I think from the point of view of the experience that they'll get in return, for young people to participate in the camp would be one of the most important, exciting parts of it.
And when we bring back summer camps, are we now full on? When you say full swing, we're back same old, because I went to the trailing like 4 before the pandemic hit, and then we shut it down for a while. So they're back, they're full swing.
They're back. They're in person. They're up and running. All of the great things about camp. And it is a good volunteer experience. So, unlike other camps where you might have one counselor per cabin, we have a 1-to-1 ratio, one counselor per one camper. And so we always need volunteers for camp. We also, if you're in the medical field, particularly, we love having volunteers who are EMTs or who are nurses or have medical backgrounds. Really great. You can go to the website, the mda.org website. There's a whole section on volunteer and where you can talk about what you're interested in doing, and we can make that happen. We have a high school intern actually who just started this summer who's working with my department on our clinical registry because she was interested in going into a clinical field.
Oh,
so
wow.
she's going to help us out. So we have plenty of ways that people can volunteer their time.
We're not going to turn a volunteer away. It
No.
sounds like we have a lot of opportunities. Okay. Well, great. I look forward to jumping back into summer camps, and I've always been a volunteer, and I look forward to jumping back in and doing that. Do you happen to know where this is a selfish question, but where the Greer, is it in Greer again for the Carolinas one?
Do you know where?
Does anybody know?
Yeah.
It is Greer. Yeah, that was a nice camp. Well, good, awesome. Lily, we'll finish up with you here, buddy, because you're why we're all here doing this and talking, and trying to figure out how to spread the message on this medium of podcasting that's relatively new. And I want to make sure that you have just an open floor to really say what's on your heart, what's on your mind. And we'll also get one more plug for that podcast you're launching here pretty soon. So what do you think Burn Nation needs to hear from you as we wrap up?
I would say, if you can, donate your money, donate your time and your energy to this cause. If you go to camp, if you donate your money, you will never truly know the impact. And I think there's a lot of beauty in that. It's sort of poetic in a way that you give whatever you can and you don't see where that goes. You don't see the smiles on the kids' faces unless you're firsthand at the camps, which if you are able to go to the camps, again, if you have a medical background, if you are super strong and you can lift kids out of wheelchairs, that is what we need. We need people that are there to empower kids, show them that people truly care about them, and to allow them to transform their mindsets about MD. So I would just say, be inspired, get involved. I know that there are plenty of charities and organizations that are pulling your pocket, pulling your time, your attention. But the MDA truly makes an impact and truly empowers people with MD. And I think that's really unique. And so whatever you can give, even if it's $5, if it's 1 week of your time for summer camp, just please do it. I think we need whatever we can to use people that are able-bodied to help us. I think, like the community, we need people to be involved. Yeah.
Any parting words, Dr. Brooks?
No, this has been a wonderful discussion, and I'm delighted to see what you're doing. And your podcast is labeled what again?
It's called Beyond the Diagnosis, and then the tagline is Expert Insights, Patient Stories. It is launching on all of the podcasting streaming services very soon, and I'll be interviewing researchers, people in the field, but also patients. So it's that duality of we have both sides of the story, and it is focused on CMT. It's in partnership with the CMT Research Foundation. So give it a listen whenever it's out soon, and I'm really excited.
All right, if you're the host, I'm in. That's for sure.
Okay. Maybe I'll interview you.
Hey, listen, I will do what I can to keep up with you, youngin. What about you, Doctor?
Yeah, I'd just like to say thank you to the whole Burn Boot Camp community, and hopefully, through this discussion, you see what you've enabled. Like it's huge. It's really important, and the whole concept of, focusing on muscle and muscle strength and being healthy and being able to translate that to an area where people are starting with some challenges in muscle weakness and muscle strength. It's a really nice combination. We really want to say thank you.
Yeah,
Yes.
well, I take that with gratitude. Thank you as well. It's a two-way street. It is a partnership, and we wanted to really pull back the curtain, and we wanted to get a look behind the scenes of what all of us know and how important and impactful this mission is. So thank you all for being here, for taking your time to come to Burn Studios today and to do this in person with me. This will live forever, and we'll be able to share this as a resource around our Be Their Muscle campaign, to get people really informed on what they're giving their money toward and what they're giving their time and attention towards. So thank you all again, and thank you for listening, Burn Nation. We love you guys, and make sure that you are looking out for Lily's new podcast. We'll put the podcast in the show notes so that you have a link to it. And we're gonna end it like we always do. 2 claps on 2. 1, 2.